Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first part of the AGM for this year. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, we are recording this. We are live streaming it to Facebook because a number of people who are on holiday will be able to access via Facebook when they can't access through Zoom. Without more ado, I'd like to hand over to our National Vice Chair, Jean Watkins, to introduce the debates and the proposer. So Jean, please unmute yourself.
I have, I believe. And can I just also say welcome to everybody and say how different things are this year, and that we're learning so many new ways to do things, which is in one way really very good for all of us. And it also means, I think, that people from across the country who couldn't have got to our normal meeting can actually join us. So that's another plus. What I'd like to do first is to actually read the mandate number 1, and then we will carry on from there for the person who will be the proposer. So mandate 1 is TG calls for a framework of legally enforceable rights and responsibilities for cyclists using roads and shared pedestrian areas, making them and/or legal guardians for minors accountable for their behaviour. So that is the wording of the mandate, and I would like to ask Jennifer Sheridan if she would like, as the proposer, to propose the mandate, please.
Tell you what, I don't know how to make myself visible, but I can read it out to you if you wish.
Wonderful, thank you.
Sorry, I'm not very technically minded. This is why I didn't really want to do this, but
as they say, join the club.
Yes. Well, hello everybody, and this is my proposal. And how many times has this happened to you, I wonder? You're walking along a pavement designed for pedestrians, when suddenly a cyclist or two hurtle up behind you with the expectation that you will get out of their way immediately. This week, my experiences with cyclists has been on walking along a pathway. I was approached by 2 middle-aged couples riding abreast of each other. They neither slowed down nor went into single file as they approached me. I had to stand aside to allow them to pass. Shortly after, 2 schoolboys rushed up from behind me, frightening the living daylights out of me as I had not heard them approach. One stepped sideways from myself, and we would have been in a very nasty collision. The third occasion in this same week was when walking around a corner on the pavement in my local village. I was confronted by a large man riding his bicycle around the blind corner. I again had to make way for him with no acknowledgement whatsoever. In my humble opinion, cyclists are now becoming pavement bullies, expecting those on foot to give way all the time. Many cyclists do not have bells to warn you of their approach, especially when coming up behind you. They do not seem to appreciate that often pedestrians have no idea that they are there. Down by our local seashore, there is a walkway which allows no vehicle access. However, cyclists now think that they have the right to rush along here. Pedestrians beware, as none will slow down nor give way to you. For the elderly, who are perhaps a little hard of hearing or poor of sight, families with young children, some in buggies or prams, dog walkers, etc., are all subjected to the same treatment from the cycling brigade of get out of our way. Fatalities and serious injuries will no doubt occur, and cyclists carry no insurance nor have to pass any sort of test to allow them to ride. My own experience of an insurance matter was that while sitting stationary in my car with the handbrake on, awaiting my turn in a queue to go around a roundabout, a cyclist came hurtling down the hill behind us, riding up the inside the line of cars. For whatever reason, the man crashed into my car, breaking the back window, and created a huge dent in both the boot lid and the passenger side of the rear of the vehicle. He, of course, had no insurance. And so my insurance company had to bear the brunt of the cost of repairs and a hire car for me to use whilst my car was off the road. It's time cyclists should have insurance cover and have to pass a cycling test if, as an adult, they do not hold a driving licence. For children under 18, their parents should have to insure them, and the children pass a cycling test. All bicycles should, however, be fitted with bells as mandatory. It's time to change the law and make cyclists responsible for their riding in public spaces and keep the pavements safe for pedestrians.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was really clear. If I could ask Barbara Cobain, please, if you could second that.
Certainly. I second this proposal because I think it's time that cyclists joined all other road users in obeying the highway code and following the rules of the road, and so ensuring everyone's safety.
Thank you very much. If I could ask for the speaker who will speak for the motion, and that is going to be Penny Ryan. Penny, could I ask you if you will talk for the motion?
Bear with me one moment while I share my screen.
I can't do clever things like that.
You should come to the Zoom classes, Jean.
I should.
Bear with me one moment. Okay. So you've already heard from our proposer about some of the reckless behaviour that she's endured, and I have to echo that. But I will say, if you are a pedestrian and are knocked down by a car, you have the right to claim compensation from the driver's insurance or the uninsured driver's compensation scheme. The driver may also face criminal charges. If you're injured as a pedestrian by a cyclist, you're unlikely to receive any compensation, and the cyclist probably won't be prosecuted. Why? Well, if there's a difficulty of identifying the cyclist, there's no compulsory insurance or licensing scheme for cyclists, and there's poor policing of cycling. Statistics are really difficult to come by because there's no duty to report accidents involving a cyclist or a pedestrian. During the pandemic, there's been a great emphasis on cycling and supposedly walking. The government published a document called Gear Change, a bold vision for cycling and walking in July 2020. But an analysis of the document shows that cycling related words occur 10 times as often as walking. They do try to soften this by saying cycling and walking together, but quite often it's only the cycling that actually is applying. Clearly, the government is set to give cyclists in England at least more rights and greater protections. So let's see, what are the legal responsibilities of cyclists? Well, these are set out in the Highway Code, and it's only things that have a must by them that have legal enforceability of any kind. So you must have your front and rear lights and reflectors. You must have efficient brakes. You should not rely on ride on the pavement, and you must obey all traffic signs and signals and not cross red lights. However, when it comes to riding on a pavement, fines cannot be enforced against under 10-year-olds. Police forces will not use a penalty for anyone under 16. And furthermore, if a cyclist believes that they will be at risk themselves if they ride on a road, no penalty will be issued to them. It's not exactly a level playing field. The Highway Code is being revised at the moment, and there is an intention that the Highway Code introduces a hierarchy of responsibility so that the more powerful road users, like lorry drivers, motorists, etc., have greater responsibility for avoiding accidents and being a danger or threat to pedestrians and cyclists. There's a proposal to clarify the rules on pedestrian priority on pavements, and also to suggest that drivers and riders should give way to pedestrians waiting to cross the road, including at junctions, so that's side roads. There are also rules are being introduced on safe passing distances, and the suggestion that where there are no pavements, drivers should slow down when passing cyclists and pedestrians. There are, however, a number of other consultations going on at the moment, including one on some proposed new offences for cyclists. The consultation document, however, states specifically, we do not intend to introduce a testing, licensing, or insurance regime for cyclists. The costs and complexity of introducing such a system would outweigh the benefits, nor do we propose to issue penalty points for cyclists. Now, the reason behind this is that they believe that it would deter cyclists, and cycling is undoubtedly a lower producer of CO2, which is relevant to climate change. But it shows a fixed mindset, and there is no evidence from the government of surveys to show what people would actually do. It's conjecture at the moment that there will be fewer cyclists if there was regulation. What are the penalties for cyclists? Well, to my mind, when you look at them, they're pretty derisory. Fixed penalties when they're imposed of 30 or 50 pounds. Maximum fine for dangerous cycling is 2,500. And some of you may remember the case from 2018, where a cyclist was actually given a custodial sentence for wanton and furious cycling an offence that was established in the 19th century because the jury did not feel they could convict him of manslaughter. There are 3 proposed new offences, each of which will carry a prison sentence: causing death by dangerous cycling, death by careless or inconsiderate cycling, and causing serious injury by careless or inconsiderate cycling. That's a starting point, because it might actually make some people realise that, you know, they are responsible. It is a serious matter. Now, why won't that go to the next slide? So the next step, in fact, is looking at enforcement. And I haven't done a slide for that. One of the problems with enforcing this is that you can't identify cyclists who are not carrying license plates. You cannot spot somebody on CCTV if they're wearing their helmet and a mask. It's very, very difficult to enforce. We don't have street policing in many areas, so it's unlikely that bad behaviour will be spotted and picked up by police. There are, however, responsibilities that can be delegated by the Chief Constable to local organisations, including traffic wardens, if the local council applies for it, so that they may enforce. They have the ability then to stop cyclists on the pavement and to issue the penalties. Not that many forces have applied for that, have allowed that delegation so far because of lack of applications. I know we're running behind. Insurance, you may be aware of that at the moment, you as a victim of an accident have to prove that the other person caused the accident before you can claim insurance. There is a move to change that so that there is strict liability, as in this hierarchy that the Highway Code will introduce, of making the more powerful automatically the person responsible unless proved otherwise. So why vote for this mandate, given all the obstacles that we will face with government? I believe that we should be holding the government to account to ensure that the proposed changes in the Highway Code and in the law relating to cycling offences should go through. So that means keeping on the back of our MPs and to raise the information, the difficulties caused by the lack of licensing and incidentally training. We need to raise awareness of the difficulties of prosecution and encourage our local authorities to use the powers that can be delegated to police cycling. And finally, we can publicise the changes in the Highway Code when they come into place to make sure that as many people as possible know about them. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny. That was really interesting. What I'd like to do now is to introduce the speaker who will be speaking against the motion. That is Dr. Rachel Lee, who is the Policy and Research Manager for Living Streets. Unfortunately, she can't be with us today in person, but she has sent her pre-recorded presentation. So if I can ask for that to go on, please.
Hello, thank you for inviting me to join you today. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in real time, but I hope that my contribution adds to a lively and productive debate. I am Policy and Research Manager for Living Streets, a national charity for walking. We were established in 1929 as the Pedestrians Association. For over 90 years, we've campaigned on behalf of pedestrians, helping to introduce the
Can't hear her.
and safe, legal pedestrian crossings named after the then Minister of Transport, Leslie Hoare-Belisha. The zebra stripes on the road were added later. So it may surprise you that today I'm speaking against the proposed mandate. Townswomen Guild calls for a framework of legally enforceable rights and responsibilities for cyclists using roads and shared pedestrian areas, making them and/or legal guardians for minors accountable for their behaviour. Please don't misunderstand me. Living Streets recognise that cycling on the pavement is the bane of many pedestrians' lives. Over the years, I've received many emails, this morning included, from people who are perhaps older and less nimble, have hearing or sight loss, who are angry, frustrated, scared, and worried by the behaviour of people riding at speed and sometimes verbally abusive in their safe spaces. The law is clear, cycling on pavements is illegal. The 1835 Act, applicable to England and Wales, created the offence of wilfully riding on a footpath by the side of the road. The offence was modified in 1999 to include a fixed penalty notice of £50. Enforcement of this law lies with chief police officers of each force, but in 2014, then Transport Minister Robert Goodwill reiterated the Home Office guidance calling for police discretion, particularly in respect of children cycling on the pavement. The law is reflected in the Highway Code, which prohibits cycling on the pavement. Rule 64, you must not cycle on the pavement. There are similar rules in both Scotland and Northern Ireland. There are exceptions, of course. It's not unreasonable for children learning to ride a bike to use a pavement with parental supervision, although children over 10 should be cycling on clearly defined cycle paths or on the road. And in some areas, cyclists and pedestrians can share the footpath. So arguably, there is already a framework of legally enforceable law and responsibilities for cyclists using roads and shared pedestrian areas, making them and/or legal guardians for minors accountable for their behaviour. The frustration that we and other campaigners face is that while the law can be enforced, in the majority of cases, it is not enforced. With the exception of some of our more urban areas, most people rarely see police officers walking the streets. Police forces do not prioritise road safety and do not have the capacity to enforce the law on pavement cycling. The advent of e-scooter trials and growing sales of privately owned e-scooters, illegal to use on public roads, has brought this issue of enforcement a much higher profile because it's the same problem. In most places, there is no police presence to enforce the law, although there have been crackdowns on the confiscation of e-scooters in cities as a result of their rising use in crime. So how do other countries manage? If you were to cycle or scoot on pavements in France, you'd be liable for a fine issued by a municipal police force officer. So this is the local police force of towns and cities in France under direct control of their elected mayor. And many of our European neighbours follow the same example. For example, Belgium, Germany, Netherlands, Spain, Italy and Portugal also have municipal police forces. The nearest equivalent in the UK is the City of London Police. Our civil enforcement officers are responsible for parking management. They do not have the power to enforce moving traffic offences. The enactment of Part 6 of the Traffic Management Act 2004 will allow the use of cameras, automatic number plate recognition, but this will only be useful for vehicles. So this brings us back to the conundrum of enforcement. Having discussed this issue among colleagues for some time now, we were wondering whether or not public space protection orders would be a useful tool for civil enforcement against illegal cycling on pavements. However, these are time limited for 3 years and are for a limited geographical area. So I would really argue that we need new civil powers of enforcement of fixed penalties so that enforcement can pay for itself, accompanied by campaigns to raise awareness of road users' responsibilities, which could be tied, for example, to updates of the Highway Code, which we are expecting imminently, placing pedestrians at the top of a hierarchy of road users. It'll be interesting to see how the government responds to the same concerns over e-scooter use. But finally, the second reason for speaking against the proposed mandate is that as an organisation, we want to see more people walking and cycling. The National Travel Survey has self-reported injury data, and it confirms that pedestrians are substantially more likely to be injured in a collision with a motor vehicle or from a fall than a collision with a cyclist. So we have a much bigger battle challenging the dominance of motor vehicles, so that we can make our roads safer and more inviting for everyone travelling on foot, by bicycle, or dare I say it, on a rental scooter. Thank you.
I'd like to thank both speakers for that, and that was really clear. Considering it was online, it was beautifully done and very clear. So I hope we're going to have a lively debate and question time following those presentations. So if I could open the floor, please, to people who would like to speak. 2, 4, against. If you have any comments, please come through to me. I'll start with one I have. I have one here that has been sent in. So if I can read this one, it may start your minds thinking of what you'd like to say and break the ice a little bit. I have one here from Sally Funnell from Dorchester Federation. She's the chairman of Dorchester Federation. And she says cycling, and she's answered the different areas. So insurance registration. At the present time, the government is trying to encourage alternative transport in order to cut down on carbon emissions and promote exercise in order to tackle obesity and health issues. I feel that these proposals would be a strong deterrent to cycling for many people, not least because of the costs involved. I believe these measures would be very difficult for the police to reinforce or enforce, and would most probably be very low on their priority. She goes on, I do agree that cyclists should be encouraged to obtain insurance, and many serious cyclists already do this, though their cycling clubs, through their cycling clubs and organisations. Training. I totally agree that cyclists should be trained, but this would require more government funding. As a nationally trained cycle instructor, I know that many instructors, especially in schools, are volunteers or paid very little for their service. At the moment, there are not enough instructors to cover the training of all cyclists. She talks about bells. It is mandatory to have a bell at the point of sale. However, if you are a fast, keen cyclist, a bell will add unnecessary weight to a bike, and they are therefore removed. Bells are difficult for motorists to hear in heavy traffic, as motorists are sitting in insulated boxes and quite often are in tune to listening to music. When using a bell on shared paths, I get 4 reactions. 1, people move aside. 2, people just don't hear. 3, people refuse to move. And also, I get a mouthful of abuse for making them jump. Parental accountability, she goes on, is that she agrees that parents should be accountable for their children, but children are not always, do not always abide by the rules that their parents set out. Whilst on my bike, I have been charged by a dog and knocked off my bike, bitten by a dog, and nearly upended by dog owners who walk one side of the path with their dogs on the other, attached by a clearly invisible lead. should dogs have insurance and registration? They are her comments. As a cat owner, I would agree with that.
I'm a
Yes,
bit.
please.
I was typing my message when you did that. Sorry.
Okay.
My question is, and concern is, that if cyclists are issued with registration or certificates to prove that they can cycle on the roads, how do they prove this? Do they have to have a badge? Is it on their bike? Do they wear it around their neck? I don't think that is realistic.
Okay, thank you. We're putting all these comments that you're making to the two people who were speaking, well, one person who was speaking, because the other wasn't here, and they will come back to you at the end. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Does anybody else have anything to offer?
I would like to say something.
Yes, can you speak up, Mr. King?
Yes. I initially, when I heard about the mandate, was sort of for the mandate, but now that I've took a little bit more interest in climate matters and took a bit more interest in transport, I actually am against the mandate. I just think that what we need, rather than legislation, is just a better structure throughout the country of separated cycle paths and pedestrian paths. I think that would achieve a lot more, and a lot more publicity about the responsibility of cyclists, pedestrians, and just generally about sharing the environment. So that's just all I'd like to say.
Yeah.
Relatively long. Sorry, go to you
It's
first.
all right. I would just like to say that as a mobility scooter user on the pavement, I'm always very aware of people in front of me and always slow down and all of that. But also I have the same issue where cyclists come racing up behind me. I don't know they're there, and they almost touch me, which makes me jump. I have a hearing issue as well. And I think the more paths that we have that are split, between cyclists and pedestrians are probably the best way forward. As the other lady says, I'm not sure how much, and I have to insure my mobility scooter. So, I think insurance is a good way for them as well as for us, because if they did knock somebody down, they should be made responsible to own up to it. But it is difficult from my point of view also with cyclists on the pavement, because I have to ride on the pavement. I'm not allowed to ride on the road. So I think split paths are probably the best way forward. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Jean, we have had a message from chat through from Anne Partington, who said, wonder how many of the ladies at this meeting cycle. I don't, but my husband does, and he has problems with inconsiderate motorists. Also, where I live, we have problems with horses on the pavements, including their mug. What about people also where I live dashing about in pony and traps? No licence responsibility, etc.
Okay, thank you for that. I have one more here that, if it's okay with you, I'd like to read. And it's from Anita Fitzpatrick. And this is what she says. I look forward to reading your proposals for rights and responsibilities, but was completely disheartened to read your article, which at no point promoted cycling or indeed have any mention whatsoever towards rights for cyclists. As a keen cyclist across a number of disciplines, road, mountain, track, etc., I find your article and debate topics concerning. 1, insurance. Many road cyclists will be members of British Cycling, which gives them a third-part liability insurance. This is not known by the general public and would be worth highlighting to your membership. Insurance and registration for kids on a low-cost bike would be another cost to parents, putting them off encouraging their children to take up cycling. There is already legislation in place for reckless road usage. I suggest you send your members out on a road ride to experience the dangerous and reckless drivers of cars that they'll be certain to meet. Training, another unnecessary cost and hindrance for people with a low-cost method of transport. How would you propose that costs should be covered? Could we add to the price of a litre of petrol, for instance? Equipment. Bells are applied on all new bikes, although pedestrians seldom respond to hearing them. Could earphones be banned for pedestrians to allow them to hear approaching traffic, bike or car? Lights are only mandatory during the hours of darkness, but even using them during the day does not guarantee that car drivers will see you. I am sure parents are already accountable for their children's actions, generally, if not legally. What form would you propose that this takes? What are the consequences? It would be worth highlighting to our members that drivers are the issue, not cyclists. Compare the number of cyclists killed in a year, around 100, versus pedestrians killed by cyclists in a year, around 2. Finally, you could mention that riding 2 abreast is legal, safer for all, and aids drivers in passing cyclists safely. I look forward to the results of your meeting and hearing the rights of cyclists that you're going to promote. Thank you. Are there any more points that people want to make? No, in that case, I'd like to thank you for all your replies, and I'm going to ask the speakers, I can only ask one speaker, to reply to the points made. So if I could ask Penny.
Jennifer wanted to say something.
Okay, thank you.
Please,
Jean,
yes. may I just add a very quick point about cyclists? And it's been mentioned about having more cycle tracks available and pedestrian tracks. In my experience, I have to say, having been walking along where there are cycle tracks, that the cyclists actually choose to cycle on the pedestrian side rather than on the designated area on the road where the cycle tracks are actually marked. And I've experienced that on more than one occasion, both being in the car and actually seeing cyclists travelling along on the pavement when there is a designated cycling track and not using it. And also walking along myself with Barbara. We've been walking along on the promenade and the cyclists have been on the pedestrian part of the pavement rather than in their own designated area. Just thought I'd add that.
That's very interesting, and thank you for that. Thank you to all of you that have spoken up and had something to say, and the people that sent their comments in. It's been really interesting, but what I'd like to do is to go to Penny Ryan for her right to reply.
Thank you, Jean. One thing that I'd like to make clear, we're talking about shared paths. The government have stated that new cycle provision, which involves sharing space with pedestrians, including at crossings, will no longer be funded. So sharing pavements will not be funded by the government. This means cycle lanes get the priority effectively. Rights for cyclists, I think that, and certainly protections from drivers, these are highly weighted in the government strategies. They're spending £2 billion on improving roads for cyclists, more cycle lanes, protected cycle lanes, protection at crossings. There is nothing for pedestrians in that budget. How do we manage licensing? Well, one of the things that I'm concerned about is that not doing something because it's too difficult shouldn't be the default. There are always ways and means of having a license plate shown, and it's not in my capability to design something, but I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who are capable of doing so. Finally, I would like to add that there are a group of cyclists who are simply sticking up two fingers to the rest of the world, including young people in London who borrow the cycling scheme bikes and use them in the centre of busy junctions to do acrobatics, stopping all the traffic, stopping pedestrians, stopping everybody in their tracks. They must be captured on CCTV, and even at Oxford Circus, where there are police around, I have never seen anybody stop them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Obviously, I am not in a position to go to our other speaker because she hasn't been here and hasn't heard the comments that you've made. But thank you to both speakers for what they've said. I'd like to just mention before we carry on about the voting procedure for the mandates. I think we may have a slide of that as well, but I will read it as well. We won't be doing any voting today. So, you know, I'd love it if you decided which way you wanted to vote, but if you could hold that and vote at the necessary times. Voting papers will be sent out to Guild primary contacts in July with the rest of the AGM paperwork. So when that's ready, that will be happening. You can see it on the screen now as I'm saying it. Let your Guild officers know how you would like your Guild to vote. And Guild committees have the final say if votes are split. Please return voting papers to TGHQ by Friday, the 10th of September. So quite a long way. So because there's a long way between that, please don't forget to do it. I know if I've got a long lead-in time to something, I personally, it goes into the front of my mind and I think, yes, I must do it. And then as time goes on and other things take over, I forget. And then, you know, try and remember again. So please do get people in your area to vote. So the voting papers to TGHQ by Friday, the 10th of September by posting, or Tuesday, the 14th of September by email. We will handle associate members voting in the usual way. We will announce the results at the online AGM on Thursday, the 16th of September. So please, and it will also go into the Townswomen's magazine. So please do not forget to vote. I will go through that once more towards the end after the next mandate, because it is such an important part. Without you voting, we don't have any decisions on the mandates. what I'd like to do now, and in fact it's my great pleasure to introduce Maureen Brown, who's our one of our national trustees, who's going to talk for a little while about another really, really important issue, and that's climate change, and give us all a climate change update. So thank you, Maureen. If I could hand over to you.
Hello, everybody. If you just give me a moment, I'm going to try and share my screen. I have been going to the whiteboard Wednesdays, so I should be able to do it. Let me have a little look. There we go. Right. Just going to get rid of that. One of the questions that we were asked about our In Our Hands campaign was why we'd started it at the time when, quite rightly, we were all focusing on the pandemic. But of course, we had, started to think about the climate emergency in 2019, which was before we knew about the pandemic. And we decided it was such an important issue that we would continue with the campaign. Such a lot has occurred since then that it's easy to forget that in 2019, the demonstrations in London by Extinction Rebellion and the disruption it caused brought the climate emergency to the attention of the media in a totally unprecedented way. I'm sure you will all recognise this young lady, Greta Thunberg. She's a young Swedish environmental activist, and she's well known for her direct way of speaking in public and to the world political leaders. She's very publicly taken them to task in what she considered is their failure to take sufficient action to address the climate emergency. And she wasn't alone in feeling like that. A lot of young people also were concerned about the climate emergency. This sparked the movement Fridays for Future, which is a global climate strike movement, and that was started in August 2018. So all this increased media attention brought the climate emergency to the attention of the Board of Trustees. When the board asked me to take the lead on this campaign, I didn't realise actually how little I knew about global warming and climate change. And I realised really quickly that doing research was going to be essential. I turned, as I always do, to books, what other people had to say on the subject. And the books on the screen were three of the most useful that I found. They all tackle it in slightly different ways. So the conclusions. I really went into this research. I really had a very sketchy knowledge about what was happening to the climate. And I certainly was no expert, and I'm still not an expert. The subject is so complex, but I do feel better informed, and I'm still learning about it as I go along. But I am really convinced that there is a climate emergency and that it is vital that we act quickly. The effects of climate change are already being felt, with more extreme weather patterns such as drought, wildfires, and flooding. So why is it an emergency? Well, it's simple really, because we haven't acted as quickly as we should have to stop global warming. Scientists have been issuing warnings since the 1980s about global warming, and even the major oil companies admitted in the 1980s that their own research indicated that global warming was the result of burning fossil fuels. I suppose a better question might be, why have we all not been more concerned? And this is another book. Now this one I actually haven't even read, but it's called Don't Even Think About It: Why Our Brains Are Wired to Ignore Climate Change. And I'm trying to get my head around why I've ignored it. And this is a little extract from an article that George Marshall wrote in The Guardian in 2014. And I think he can explain it maybe better than I can. The primary reason is that our innate sense of social competition has made us acutely alert to any threat posed by external enemies. In experiments, children as young as 3 can tell the difference between an accident and a deliberate attack. Climate change confounds this core moral formula. It is a perfect and undetectable crime everyone contributes to, but which no one has a motive. There's no outsider to blame. We are just living our lives, driving the kids to school, heating our homes, putting food on the table. But only once we accept the threat of climate change do these neutral acts become poisoned with intention. So we readily reject that knowledge or react to it with anger and resentment. I'm not sure if that totally explains it. I think there's also a little bit of, we don't like change. Nobody likes to change things that they're happy doing. But I think that explains a little bit about it. I'm going to read the book in future. Of course, it would be wrong to say that nothing has been done about it, because it has. The UN has been working since the 1990s to bring about a global climate agreement. And the Paris Agreement in 2015 saw 195 countries adopt the first ever universally legally binding global climate deal. In the UK, we had a Climate Change Act in 2008, and it introduced the first legally binding target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And on the 27th of June 2019, it was amended to set a legally binding target to achieve net zero greenhouse emissions by 2050. In November 2020, the government took the historic step towards net zero, with the end of the sale of new petrol and diesel cars by 2030. On the face of this, it would seem that it's all really positive. However, targets have been set in the past and not met. And even the government's own MPs, the Public Accounts Committee, has criticised the government for its lack of a plan. So to meet net zero targets, difficult decisions will have to be made by the government, and it would need the willingness of the general public to ensure this comes about. This is why, as an organisation, TG wants to encourage conversations about climate change, and this is why we've been focusing on it in recent months. So what have we been doing? Well, you'll have seen the series of magazine articles that we've had. And in January, it was decided that we would dedicate the January edition of the newsletter to the climate emergency. We felt it was important to give all members a printed version of the newsletter. You can have that on hand to refer to or to pass on to family and friends. Of course, social media has its place as well. Facebook, as well as the written word. TG has been promoting the In Our Hands campaign through our Facebook pages. In February, members were encouraged to take part in the Climate Coalition's Show the Love campaign. Members put posters up at their windows and sent postcards to their MPs. We also took part in the Food Action Waste Week, and we ran a successful Facebook promotion all through that week. And our most recent promotion on Facebook was to encourage members to take part in the government's consultation on the deposit return scheme. As well as individual members taking part in the consultation, TG as an organisation submitted a response. So what are we going to do next? In November 2021, the UK will be hosting the COP26 conference, and TG would like to get involved and deliver a message that TG members are concerned about climate change and actively involved in building a more sustainable future. To deliver the message, we would like members to make a pledge to change. Write your pledge down on a leaf and send it to Birmingham. In the next magazine, there will be more information about this. There will be a leaf template for you to copy, or if you are a crafter, use your imagination and craft a leaf. When they arrive in Birmingham, they will be collected together and we will see that they're delivered in a safe way to Glasgow. We'd like COP26 to know that our members come from all around the country. So please remember to include on your pledge your name, guild and area of the country you come from. And it would be nice if you could send into the headquarters a photograph of you holding your leaf, hopefully in a recognisable landmark in your area. Or why not take a photo of yourself on some form of sustainable transport? Photos are great, but videos, maybe little short videos, would also be welcome. The plan is for headquarters to make a video of a virtual journey by our members from all around the country, ending with somebody delivering the leaf pledges to COP26 in Glasgow in November. I mean, in an ideal situation, it would have been nice to actually make this journey, but we're not sure if that's going to be possible at the moment. And ongoing, we have a climate action group, Climate Action TIG. It meets on the second Tuesday of the month and has members from all the way around the UK. We chat about climate issues, you know, have discussions about them. Why not come along and just join in with the discussions? I hope that was of some interest to you. And remember, if you have any questions or suggestions, please contact the headquarters at Birmingham and they'll be happy to pass them along to myself or help you if they can. So that's all I've got to say for now.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. Thank you. We're now going to turn to our second mandate, which I think you know is about public toilets. And before I read out the mandate, I found just a little funny that I'd just like to read to you. What starts with the letter Q and ends with a P? A public loo, if you can find one. Rome. Okay, now let's get serious. I'd like to read the mandate out and then I'll be asking the proposer to speak to it. TG is concerned that the decline in the number of free-to-access toilets is a threat to citizens' hygiene, health, mobility, dignity, and equality. We therefore urge Her Majesty's government to make adequate provision of free public toilets a legal requirement for local authorities, supported by protected, sustained funding. So what I'd like to do now, please, is ask Elizabeth Wilson, who's from Lincoln Minster Guild, if she will talk to her mandate.
Lincoln Minster TG members were reminded of the shortage of public toilets when reading the local newspaper in October 2019, which reported complaints from shop staff about the use of nearby pavements as toilets. Subsequent reports have highlighted national scarcity, which was exacerbated during the COVID-19 lockdowns when many public toilets and businesses were closed. This is not a new problem, and the national decline in public toilets disproportionately affects women, people with ill health, the elderly, and the homeless. It is not a legal requirement for councils to provide an adequate number of public toilets. After years of central government cuts to their budget, many councils have reduced this service to save money. Provision of free public toilets should be made a statutory requirement with protected, sustained funding from government. This would encourage people to go out from their homes, thus reducing social isolation, and would increase physical activity, as well as being essential for the homeless. Innovative schemes to help fund them could be implemented, such as voluntary contactless card payment on exit, advertising in the premises, and donation by makers of sanitary provisions. Public toilets should be considered as essential as roads and rubbish collection, and equally well enforced by legislation. Free public toilets change lives for the better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I could call on, please, Beryl Hales, who is going to second the motion. Beryl, as I'm sure all of you know, is National Vice Chair for TG.
Thank you. If you listened to Woman's Hour 3 or 4 weeks ago, you'll have heard a discussion about public toilets. This included someone from the British Toilet Association explaining that access to them gave many people the confidence to go out and not feel like prisoners in their own homes. But they went on to say there were 50% fewer toilets in the UK than a decade ago. A lot of local authorities relied on the community toilet scheme, where businesses made their loos accessible to the community. But this stopped due to COVID restrictions. And with many businesses not reopening, the whole area of access to toilets needs to be addressed, both for individuals and to support economic recovery. Therefore, I'd like to second this proposal.
Thank you very much. I'd like now, please, to call on Professor Joanne Richard, who is going to be speaking for the motion.
Thank you very much, Jean. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Excuse me, I'm still a novice at Zoom, no matter how many Zooms I've done. How do I do this again? There we go. Okay, thank you for inviting me to talk to you today, and I'm here to make the case for increased public toilet provision. So what's the current state of public toilets? Well, as of 2020, when we last looked at numbers, we found that there was 3,990 public toilets in England and Wales. And actually, there'd been a steady decline over 20 years. And we assessed, well, actually, the Valuation Office assessed that there had been the 35% decrease of facilities since 2000. Now, public toilets are basically owned and operated by district councils and unitary authorities, but the majority of the provision has shifted to the private sector. So this sort of shows a major shift from a historically civic public service into a private service. So really, public toilets have shifted to what we now know as publicly accessible toilets. Now, I also co-run a website called the Great British Public Toilet Map, and we list public toilets and publicly accessible toilets. And currently we show over 13,500 facilities. But if you were to put that against a population of 68 million, I think you would agree that there still isn't enough. And who are publicly accessible toilets actually accessible to? Well, some private providers, such as train stations and motorway services, etc., offer general access for everyone. And some local authorities, as mentioned, have partnered with private providers to offer community toilet schemes. But these community toilet schemes do also include private restrictions to access. The private provider can deny entry. They may not want certain homeless people coming into their business to use toilets. And also small businesses might not have accessible toilets that are suitable to the British standard and are accessible to many disabled people. And so this could be very problematic. And of course, we have to remember that everyone needs the toilet. The normal aspect of toilet use is that ideally we empty our bladder 4 to 6 times a day. Emptying our bowels might be 3 times a day for some to 3 times a week. Women need to use the toilet more often due to pregnancy, menstruation and menopause. And men gradually need to use the toilet more often, not just due to drinking, but due to prostate problems. Now, we have 12 million people in this country who are aged over 65, and ageing also causes more access to toilets. We need to go more often and we need to reach the facilities faster. But some people need to use the toilets more than others. We have 14 million people with a bladder condition. We have 6.5 million people with bowel conditions. And actually these conditions predominantly affect women. Over half the UK population is female, and historically, we've always had less provision than men. Toilets are vital for active economies, for earning money. People who are working out on the streets, delivery drivers, taxi drivers, maintenance workers, community nurses, they need to access a toilet when they're doing their work. And also for spending money, for actually spending more time in the high streets, on the way travelling to high streets, and also for leisure activities in towns and city centres. And toilets are vital for active lives, for health and well-being, exercise and fun and leisure. Having toilet facilities would enable people to actually stay out of the home longer. Also for active travel, walking and cycling, slower than driving and maybe taking a bus. You need to maybe stop on the journey to use a toilet. For trip chaining, where you do multiple stops on one journey, and research has shown that women tend to have more segmented journeys than men. So coupled with the need to use the toilet more, we need more toilets. But we do have conflicts of provision. Traditional gender segregated design can be difficult for families, also for those caring of others of the opposite gender. And this puts pressure on the unisex disabled toilets. But also traditional gender segregated design is preferred by many older people, and also those who observe hygiene considerations of faith. The UN has found that a lack of toilets restricts economic activities amongst women and girls. The Royal Society of Public Health has found a lack of toilets reduced access to healthy lifestyles and could be linked to obesity. There was a lack of provision that was keenly felt during lockdown, and the national closures affected many care workers, the majority of whom were women and many are over 50. We consider this an essential facility for public health infrastructure, especially for maintaining hygiene through hand washing. Toilets are essential to place, and the levels of provision differ throughout the UK. It's literally a postcode lottery. There is no legal obligation for local authorities to provide public toilets, and there is no consistent policy across the regions for provision, and there is no agency assuming responsibility or support. So I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce you to the Great British Public Toilet Map and ask, are your local toilets listed? If they're not, please add them. And also, if you require any further information, we've produced a guide on publicly accessible toilets after COVID. We have a website called Tinkle that offers all kinds of information on toilets. We do research as the Public Toilets Research Unit, and we also offer consultancy as Public Convenience Limited. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Joanne. That was really interesting. So if I'd like to go now, please, to Councillor Ian Ward from Birmingham City Council, who's going to speak against the debate.
Thank you very much, Jean, and good afternoon. And thank you for inviting me along to join you today for this urgent debate, which I know we're all dying to have. I must admit, it makes a pleasant change at the moment to be talking, not to be talking about the COVID pandemic. Although, having listened to Elizabeth, Beryl and Joe, I believe I have something of a challenging task this afternoon, for which I have everything crossed. Because although the cynics amongst you might imagine that defending the indefensible would come naturally to a politician, arguing against the need for public toilets is a somewhat tricky proposition, and I don't expect to be flushed with success by the end of this debate. So how do I make the case for less loos or fewer facilities? Well, my first point would be that your private business should be no business of the state. The public sector should not be prying into the intimacies of your life. A person's toilet needs should be private and not public. Then, of course, there is the issue of cost. After all, public toilets are expensive to run, and like councils up and down the country, Birmingham City Council has suffered over a decade of cuts. Since 2010, 60p in every pound local government receives from central government has been cut. Councils, I would argue, need to do much more than spend a penny. There is, of course, no law, as said earlier, that compels councils to provide public toilets, so it's hardly surprising that these facilities have become a victim of cost saving. And let's face it, most high streets have plenty of shops, pubs, restaurants and coffee shops with toilet facilities. Indeed, as part of the recovery, it should be our public duty to pop into a pub or a coffee shop, buy a drink and use the loo. Pee out to help out, if I might. I can also make my argument about equality in a slightly different way to Joe's argument that we heard earlier. A growing number of local authorities, 37 at the last count, now have no council-run public toilets at all. So in the interests of consistency and fairness and equality across the country, should we not close the remaining public toilets elsewhere? What we should not have is a postcode lottery for being able to spend a penny. And instead, we should have what is quite literally a race to the bottom. And there's an added bonus that the closed facilities offer a rather unique change of use opportunity for the private sector. One East London toilet has become a nightclub called Public Life, while another convenience in Clapham was transformed into a wine bar called WC. The WC stands for Wine and Charcuterie. Great examples of the public convenience becoming an opportunity rather than an inconvenience for the private sector. Although I'm not sure that those clever puns on the names came as consolation to the people caught short in those areas. So I must admit that I'm somewhat struggling at this point to make a compelling case, but maybe the internet and more specifically social media can come to my rescue. After all, in an era when countless public figures seem to make a living out of holding and expressing the most controversial and contrary views, surely someone has managed to put forward a convincing argument against public toilets. Well, apparently not. I have trawled Twitter and Facebook, but struggled to find anyone willing to take on this debate. Nobody, it seems, out there is speaking out in favour of fewer public toilets. This, it would appear, is a U-bend too far for even the most opinionated columnist or Z-list celebrity out there. They, it seems, recognise that they will be onto a loser trying to make the case I am trying to set out this afternoon. So, who am I to argue with the vast majority of public opinion? Toilets, the loo, the small boys or girls' room, the convenience, even the carsy, whatever you want to call it, they are necessary for life. Public toilets do indeed matter. They are, as was said earlier, a vital public health facility, supporting communities and giving people dignity and reassurance. And if we can get spending on vital public services back to the top of the agenda in Whitehall, then I have every confidence that local authorities right across this country would return public toilets to towns and cities up and down the length and breadth of the country. And indeed, that is why just last week I signed off a council decision to provide additional toilet facilities in Cannon Hill Park, which is the jewel in the parks here in the city of Birmingham, and for increased maintenance to park toilets elsewhere right across the city. The truth is that money is still very tight for councils, but where possible, we're willing to spend more than a penny on public toilets. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was brilliantly done. Very, very humorous, I have to say. I was trying to come up with a lavatorial term, but I couldn't find one in my mind that quickly. What I'd like to do is to open the floor for public questions or debates or comments about the issue. And then we'll come back to both speakers if we have time, or if you have time, to just answer some of those points. I'd like to say that near me, I live in Bournemouth, and one of the restaurants not so long ago was quite well used as a toilet. No, one of the toilets, which was quite well used, suddenly closed down. About a month later, it became a restaurant. And I have wanted to stand outside the door of that and say, do you know this was a toilet a little while ago, just to see people's reaction on that. I haven't really had the guts to do it, so I don't think I will now. I have to say, I've never been into the restaurant for a meal. So if I can open the floor for questions, please. So if anybody has any questions, could they speak up now? And if I could ask you, if you are speaking from the floor, could you please give your name and your guild? Thank you. Anybody going to talk to me?
Just to start us off, I've just had a message from Liz Hatch, who said, what constitutes an adequate provision? It could be linked to size of population in a local authority area, but that wouldn't make allowance for seasonal influxes, for example, in seaside towns such as Bournemouth. Any legal requirement would have to take this into account. Nobody wants people using our beaches and beauty spots as toilets. Any comments?
True. Does anybody want to come back on that?
Can I just ask? I don't know how much these pods cost. I've been on holiday abroad once or twice where they've had these pods that are sort of self-cleaning. Oh, you have to pay for them, granted, but they were like a self-cleaning pod. And I wondered, do we have those in this country? I've not seen any here, but abroad I have.
Yes, we do have them. Yeah, we do have them.
Do we?
Okay. Many of them, or just a few?
There used to be more, but they've been closing and been taken away because research has shown that people over the age of 65 don't like using them, and they're not very user friendly. So I think that it would be time for a good redesign. And I think they're in principle, they're an excellent idea, but in practice, they can be quite dark and not very pleasant. And if you don't like using the automatic train toilets and using the doors and the locks and everything, they're basically the same thing.
Fear of being locked in. Maybe. I have one here that somebody has sent, Sally Funnell, who sent one for the previous mandate we were talking about, who's the chairman of Dorset Federation. She just makes a comment that public toilets, I totally agree with this mandate and feel that more shops should be required to provide toilets and advertise them for use by all. That's just a comment there.
Can I follow on to that comment? A lot of our high street shops are closing down for financial reasons since COVID and before that, before COVID also. The few shops that are left, they do have toilets available, but more and more restaurants and cafes and bars, because of COVID, don't allow customers just to wander through to use the toilets. You have to have a table booked before you can go into a property now that sells alcohol and food. So we're restricted on the shops, and we're also restricted on the food. And I do apologise, I didn't introduce myself like you asked. I'm Ronnie Preston, and I'm chairman for Lincoln Minster Townswomen's Guild.
Thank you.
So obviously I'm going to support Elizabeth on her mandate.
Yes.
But I do feel strongly about the points I've just made, the lack of shops, and we're not allowed to wander into restaurants and bars anymore.
Just to follow on from that, I have had a comment from Anne Partington, who says that it makes the point, shops and libraries are not open in the evening. We don't all want to go into a pub or nightclub just to use the toilet.
Yes. Any more comments from anybody else?
Yeah, I'm Sarah Carr from Warwick, and I'm the chairman for our Woodlows Townswomen's Guild. I have a disability, so it also makes it very difficult, like, to access some public toilets if they're down steps or whatever. And also, I have a bit of a fear of being locked in, like you say. I have a radar key, which is obviously very useful. But going around town, you know, I have medical problems. Sometimes I, you know, need to go there rather quickly, and there's just nothing available. And I can't just go into a restaurant or whatever anyway, because it can be difficult to get in there. And not all facilities are available to people with physical disabilities. And obviously there are more hidden disabilities as well. And one other thing I'd like to say is once I was, you know, desperate, can't use an ordinary toilet, and this woman was in there breastfeeding her baby in the toilet, which must be really uncomfortable for her as well, because there was nowhere else for her to feed her baby. But it's not pleasant, but it's also not practical. There should be more facilities for disabled people. You shouldn't have it in the same area as breastfeeding mothers.
Mm.
I found that quite a problem, really. It's just, I find it very difficult to find somewhere that I can actually go and use. And one day I had to go into a supermarket because there was nothing else around. And luckily, you know, it was open. But I'm very conscious about going into public toilets anyway. I don't particularly like them, but they are a must. And I think it's a basic human right to be able to go to a toilet in a public place.
Okay, thank you for that. That's very interesting comments you made there.
Are there any more? That Penny would like to say something.
Hi. From my own point of view, I'm a walker. Well, I have been in the past a walker. My feet aren't so good these days, but I've done a lot of long distance routes. Now, I'm not asking for toilets to be placed in on every walking route, but it does get very difficult if you're doing something like the Thames Path or the North Downs Way, where there used to be toilets, and the guidebooks say that there will be a toilet, to find that it's disappeared. Somehow we do, and women are at a greater disadvantage because we cannot simply open a fly to pee. So I think we need a design rethink. We need some areas perhaps where there are only women's facilities even, or even if it's just a sheltered area, like an artificial bush. Some parts of the country have no bushes or walls to jump behind, so you're exposed. And I think we need the provision in those places as well as on our high streets.
Thank you. Any more comments from anybody? No? Okay. What I'd like to do then is to give our speakers the right to reply to those. So if I could ask Joanne, please, if you wouldn't mind sort of replying to the comments that you've heard.
Yes, really interesting comments. Sarah Carr's comment about accessibility is particularly poignant for myself as a professor of accessible design. And one of the points that I was hoping to make in the presentation was that during, with the community toilet schemes, it's all very well businesses opening up their toilets, but a lot of small businesses haven't really followed the standard for accessibility, and so their toilets, or they have a step leading up to their business. For some reason, the checks and balances on ensuring the toilet is accessible or the business accessible hasn't been followed through, and this is quite a big problem throughout the UK. So that is quite problematic. Regarding Penny's notion of sort of basic facilities on walking routes that just provide some kind of shielding. Yes, I think there should be that. And I think we would have a really good opportunity right now to put in toilets that were maybe compostable or something, so that the waste, doesn't require the plumbing infrastructure to actually support this. It can, go back into the countryside, so to speak. So that would be quite important, I think. I'd like to comment a little bit on something Ian said about, with all the pubs and restaurants. And I must admit, I did like pee out to help out. I thought that was great, as I'm a big fan of a pun. But we have to ask, what about people who can't afford £1, £2, £3 for a cup of coffee to pee out to help out, especially mothers with lots of children and everything. It can suddenly, if your children want to go 2 or 3 times every 15, 20, I don't know, I don't have children, but if your children want to go a lot, then that could end up being quite expensive, and it could be really, really problematic. I think that we really need to sort of think seriously about how we can provide public toilets, and new and well-designed toilets that are open for everybody, and that also maybe provide areas for breastfeeding, not necessarily within the toilet itself, but in a big facility. And this wouldn't be on every high street. We can find alternative ways for every high street, but definitely in major town centres. I think it's really, really important, because at the end of the day, knowing that there's a toilet out there offers you more freedom of movement. It gives you more confidence to leave home and be away from home longer. And 9 times out of 10, when you are out from home longer, you're going to be spending a little bit more money. So I think it's good for the environment and good for the financial environment of our towns and cities, as much as our bladder and bowel health.
Thank you very much. Ian, would you like to come back on any of that?
Thanks very much, Jean. There's 2
and good luck.
There's 2 things I'd like to pick up, actually. The first one was the comment that was made about adequate provision and how would that be determined in different local authority areas around the country. I actually think that that should be left to the discretion and the consideration of the local authority concerned. I think that each local authority should demonstrate what adequate needs they have in their area, and then make that case to government. And government should be mandated to provide the funding, not only the capital funding that will be needed to provide public toilets, with so many now having closed, but also the revenue funding that will be needed to both maintain and ensure that they are cleaned and looked after, etc. And then the other point I wanted to make was on this issue about shops, bars, restaurants, etc., allowing the public in to use their toilets. In many ways, I don't think that's fair on the businesses themselves to have a continued procession of people in and out who are just using the toilet. And I mentioned Cannon Hill Park here in Birmingham. In Cannon Hill Park, we have an arts centre called the Midlands Arts Centre. And one of the reasons that we've now put new toilets into Cannon Hill Park is that they came to see me a few weeks ago saying that the Midlands Arts Centre might have a capacity, I don't know, maybe up to 1,000. Cannon Hill Park on a sunny day might have 5,000 people in it, and they just can't cope with that many people coming in to use their toilets. So I don't think it's fair. I do think the responsibility sits with local authorities. But in the world we live in here in Great Britain, with such a centralised state, local authorities are, of course, reliant upon government grant for much of their income and their spend. I'd like to see a move away from that, actually, and local authorities become more financially independent. But given where we are at the moment, I do believe that national government have to provide the funding for this. And I want to wish you, actually, the best of luck with your campaign. I'm absolutely behind you in this cause. And if Birmingham City Council can help in any way, then we're more than happy to join with you in trying to get government to see sense on this issue.
Thank you very much. We might take you up on that, you never know. Thank you. And I know you were tight for time today, so thank you very much for staying and replying.
Thank you, Jean. I've very much enjoyed this, actually. I've tried to make my response humorous. Hopefully I've had some
succeeded.
Yeah, I will have to leave, but thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to thank everybody who's taken part in this mandate this afternoon, people from the floor who've come up with questions, obviously our main speakers who have spoken to and against the mandate, and we will let you know the result as soon as we have it. As I said before, the voting procedure normally would take place on the day of when we discuss and debate the mandates. For obvious reasons, we can't do that at the moment. So if you'd like to put that slide back up again, if somebody put the slide up on the mandates and the voting procedure. If I just go very quickly through it again, there's no voting today, but we've had some really lively debates. So please keep that totally in mind when you come to vote. The voting papers will be sent to primary guild contacts in July. You need to return your voting papers to TGHQ by the 10th of September if you're posting it, and by the 14th of September if you're emailing. And we'll associate members will also have their voting papers will be sent to them, and they will be able to vote in the normal way. And we'll announce the result on the online AGM on the 16th of September, and it will be in the following issue of the Townswomen's magazine. So all of us for me is to thank you so much for joining in the debate, being part of the debate, whether you were talking at the debate, just listening to it and making your own minds up and sharing it with people when you go back, or speaking from the floor because you had a question following listening to the people who were talking. So thank you very much for taking part. And really doing it online wasn't as scary as I thought it was going to be. So I'm really pleased about that. I'd like to hand over now, please, to Rhiannon, who's going to talk about the developments of our past mandates. Rhiannon.
Hi, everyone. So obviously last year was a bit quiet on the campaigns front for obvious reasons, but I did just want to give a few brief updates on things that relate to some of our past campaigns and what's been going on. The first of all is the domestic abuse bill. This received its royal assent on the 29th of April this year. So some of the provisions are already in effect. Some of them are due to start end of this month, and then there are some that are still to be decided. But the new bill will help to ensure further protections for victims and stronger measures to tackle perpetrators. It also sets a wide-ranging definition of what domestic abuse is, So not just covering physical violence as it would have been looked at before, but economic abuse, emotional abuse, controlling or coercive behaviour, things that aren't as overt, but obviously still go on where we don't see it. So that's that one. Under 18 marriage, as we know, there was a previous bill by Pauline Latham, who back in 2018, shortly after we passed our mandate. That unfortunately did not really progress very far. But this week, in fact, I had an email about it from Marilyn on Monday, to say that there's a new private members bill due to go through Parliament this week by Sajid Javid. Obviously, we don't have much to say about it at the moment because it hasn't happened yet. But from initial reports, it does seem that it's going to be quite well received. The reports have been very positive about this actually going through this time. So what I would say, this is a great way to start getting back onto the members helping us with campaigns, to contact your local MP and remind them that TG is in favour of this. I have been working on a template letter. Obviously, I want to hold off on saying it's available until we know more about what the bill looks like. But that will be available hopefully from next week. So just drop me an email if you need help and I'll be happy to send that. And on a similar note, gambling. At the end of 2020, there was a review launched into the Gambling Act 2005, which is 15 years ago, which takes a moment sometimes to think 2005 was 15 years ago, but here we are. And it's just to make sure that the legislation is adequate to cover the changes that have happened in those 15 years, and especially obviously online restrictions, because obviously online gambling has become much more of a presence. So think online restrictions such as stake limits and age limits, and also the Gambling Commission's role and powers. The call for evidence closed at the end of March, so it's not much that's come from that yet. However, there was a report in The Guardian today that said that there was widespread public support for a total ban on gambling adverts, which, as you may recall, was one of our mandates in 2015. So again, this will be a great opportunity to get in touch with your MP, let them know about our mandate, let them know that we are in support of that being the case, and we're in support of the Royal Society of Public Health's urging to use the current review to forcibly reduce the number of adverts placed by the gambling industry, and that to cover television, radio, and online. And again, this only came through today, so I don't have anything prepared for it yet, but I will be working on a draft letter for that as well, if you need help with sending something to your MPs. So please bear with me, and that will be around soon. And one other thing on the gambling is that to say that part of the review stated that from October this year, the minimum age for playing the National Lottery will be raised from 16 to 18. So that brings it in line with other age restrictions for gambling. And one last thing, not about a specific campaign, but about the website. We have been for a while now just looking at how we can update the campaign section of the website make it more engaging, make it more user friendly, because it has spiraled a bit out of control. Obviously, we were hoping to do something about that sooner, but last year happened. We all know what happened last year, so it's been a bit delayed, but we are now working on getting the framework in place for that. And there are two things that we do need from members. So if you can have a think, if you can let your other members know if they have anything. First thing is for the toolbox section, which we want to be somewhere that you can get useful resources. The past mandates will be there, so if you ever need to see what the list is, that will be there. But we'd like to know what you would like to see in that section, or what would you would find useful in that section, because obviously we can guess, but it's a lot more helpful, and it will be a lot more helpful for you if you can tell us what you need, and then we can see how we can make that happen. And the other thing is that we would like to have a section that's dedicated for member campaigns. So if you have any stories about local campaigns, things that you as a guild have been involved with, or if as members you've worked to campaign on local issues or help to raise a national issue within your local area, anything along those lines, have a think. There will be a submission form on the website once the section's overhauled. If you can think about if you've got anything for now, so when that's up and ready, you can send it across, or if you want to drop me an email, send it that way, and so we can make sure that we can celebrate what members are achieving. And that's about it for the moment. Obviously, things will pick up again in terms of the mandates once we've had the AGM meeting, once we know the result of today's debates. And in the meantime, it will just be a case of getting the website as we would like it, keeping an eye on other things that are happening. And again, you know, if there's anything that you as members want to ask about, if there's anything you'd like to share with us, obviously do drop me an email. And yeah, that's about all I have. So thank you.
Thank you. And Penny, I think you were going to conclude.
I'm going to wrap up now.
Yes.
And you'll all heave a great sigh of relief. Thank you all for joining in today. I hope you found it interesting. We managed with remarkably few technical glitches, thankfully. And I'd like to especially thank Kelly, who's been beavering away in the background dealing with technical issues, and Rhiannon for the way that she has helped manage the debates today and finding speakers. I'm wondering whether we should have a permanent social studies or current affairs group on our TIG site for us to discuss issues as they come up during the year as well. If you would be interested in that, why not send an email to me at chairman@the-tg.com, and that will enable us to start thinking about getting a monthly TIG group for discussing issues like this. In the past, social studies groups were always part of TGs, but they've dropped out. They don't feel quite as relevant as they may have done, like during the Second World War, when they spent some time. They were encouraged to discuss questions of the day while they were knitting and sewing. So it was maximizing productivity. But our TIG is a great way of bringing people from around the country together to think about the serious issues that you may no longer want to bring up at guild level. So thank you all for coming. Next year, I've got everything crossed. We will be in Scarborough. I know there are a lot of members who've gone up there this week to suss it out, and they've got a lovely week for it. Thank you all for coming. I hope it's sunny enough where you are for you to go and take a cup of tea or a cold drink to the garden and have a relaxing afternoon. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.